Okay, again, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on our webinar, part of our Six Sigma series, Six Sigma study series, Key Concepts of Project Management, where we get together once a month to share some area within the body of knowledge of Six Sigma and helping prepare folks for either practicing, applying the tools and techniques at their work, or if they're preparing for the certification. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, good, fast, cheap, pick two, the mantra for all project managers in general, but then we're going to relate that to project management within a Six Sigma improvement project. We're going to introduce a project management framework, the PMBOK 5th edition, which is the Project Management Institute's framework for their project management professional certification, not necessarily directly related to the Six Sigma body of knowledge. However, we feel that the framework is very solid, and a lot of the basics and fundamentals are still there. And if prepared with this framework, the PMBOK framework, it will also help you in Six Sigma as well. I should also mention a little caveat here. The 6th edition is actually coming out this month. So stay tuned for updates from us on that once we get a hold of the new standard and kind of compare and contrast. But for now, the fifth edition is a very good framework, well proven in, and we use it quite often. What we're going to share with you is the 5 process groups within the 5th edition PMBOK, 10 knowledge areas, and the 47 processes that are available to you as a project manager and improvement project. We'll kind of just talk about projects in general in a nutshell, and then we're going to share some of the tools and techniques that are very helpful for just project management in general, but also for driving continuous improvement projects. And then we'll try to allow a little time at the end for some Q&A. So good, fast, cheap, pick two. Project management provides a structured methodology and a set of tools that aids in the planning and execution of a project. Now, projects, I want to differentiate between projects and operations. Projects are generally temporary in nature. They set out to deliver a particular outcome, which we'll call the scope of the project, by a specified due date, which is going to be the time element of the good, fast, and cheap, and using given resources or available resources, which usually have some cost associated with them. Scope, time, and cost in project management circles are typically referred to as this triple constraint, because changing one will impact the other. There is a direct link. And this is why we always say pick two. As a project manager, if the sponsor of your project or customer, client, what have you, wants particular scope within a certain amount of time, you're going to have to tell them the cost that's associated with it, right? So they really can't get good, fast, and cheap, right? If they want it good and fast, there's going to be some cost associated with that. And then, you can do that exercise for all 3 of these. But while the very basics of project management is going to be around this triple constraint, where you're trying to identify the work that needs to be done and schedule it to be done and allocate resources to get it done. There's a lot more that you're going to want to know about project management, whether you're driving, as I said before, any project or certainly a continuous improvement project. So what is project management? Project management is proven to be effective in navigating organizations for project execution. Kind of hinted before, projects are temporary in nature, set out to deliver a particular goal, a particular deliverable within a certain amount of time. Operations, on the other hand, is just ongoing, right? Think of a manufacturing operations where it's the daily bump and grind, or even a restaurant operations, right? It's there are processes in place, but it's always the same thing over and over and over again. Where projects generally looking to create something new, even though you may have similar projects, each one is always a little bit different. Now, how does that link in with Six Sigma? Six Sigma is a natural extension of project management. A lot of times black belts will often fill this role in improvement projects. And, for some projects, you can also have a green belt, lead some of these projects and start sharpening their project management skills as well. As I mentioned before, we're going to introduce some of the key fundamentals of project management using the PMP framework. They've created a wonderful framework that is very, very easy to follow. They've identified 5 process groups, which I typically will say were project phases, right? You'll see that all projects will naturally go through these phases. And then there's 10 knowledge areas or aspects of the project. And this is the part where I said, the time, cost, and scope elements are 3 very important elements, but there are at least 7 others that you want to consider. And then 47 processes that basically are available to the project manager to help guide them through setting up and managing a project. So the 5 process groups, and when I go through these, if you've worked on a project before or led a project before, you'll probably agree that all projects will go through these 5 phases. First one is initiating. This is where we define the project charter and represents the formal beginning of the project. This is where we're kind of kicking it off and saying that we want to pursue this goal. We want to allocate some resources to achieve this goal. Then comes the planning aspect. Right? This is where we define the plan for the project scope, the timing, and the cost, and the other relevant areas. This is where we have the end in mind that we're trying to get to. We're just trying to assess where we're at and come up with the map, if you will. This is where I am today. The goal is what we want to accomplish in the project, and we systematically create this roadmap that allows us to guide a team through the execution of that project to deliver that goal. Then comes the execution. This is when the rubber hits the road, and the project manager will be responsible to help manage the execution of the project plan, making sure that tasks are being delivered upon, and also working. The project manager has a little bit of a servant leadership role in this, in that project manager isn't just necessarily dictating what needs to get done, but also serving to help alleviate any roadblocks or obstacles that the project team has encountered. Together with that, concurrently with execution, is the monitoring and controlling. So while the project manager is working with the team to identify the next tasks per the schedule to work through, monitoring and controlling is kind of the feedback loop where we ensure that the execution is tracking to plan. We could check in periodically through meetings, update through electronic means, email. There are many different communication channels. We're going to talk about that as well. But basically, this is that feedback loop where the project manager can see how well we're tracking to plan and make any adjustments as needed. And then closing is one that often gets overlooked. I don't know about you, but I've been on many projects. Some that I've even led, to be honest with you, but a lot of times you kind of get towards the end where those final deliverables have been completed. Maybe there's 1 or 2 more loose ends, but the team kind of informally disbands, and there was never really a solid closure. So a formal closing of the project is very important. One, just to kind of give clarity and to celebrate the wins that the team went through, but then also a form of what we call post-mortem, right, or lessons learned. It's always good, for project teams as well as the project manager to reflect back on how the project went, what went well, what didn't go so well, so that we could take those learnings and, make the next project even better. So those are the 5 process groups that we want to consider. Now, with those 5 process groups, there's also 10 knowledge areas. And when I go through these 10 knowledge areas, this is the order that's published in the PMBOK. I always skip the first one. I say, we'll come back to that one, but let's start with the second one, scope management. We talked about that before. It defines it defines and manages the what of the project, right? What is the goal of the project? What is the defined deliverables that we're trying to deliver on? That is the scope of work. And we have tools and techniques and processes to help identify that and to manage it. The next one is the time management. This is where the project timeline comes in. Allows us to create a project's schedule, as well as some tools and techniques to identify how we are tracking to schedule and to make some course corrections. The third is the cost management. This is define and manage the project costs. As I mentioned before, in order for work to get done, you need some resources of some type, right? Maybe it's human resources to execute the plan. Maybe it's capital resources that you need, machines, equipment, software. Maybe it's consumable items, but this is the area that you're going to want to focus on to get a good estimate of the project cost. And I just want to reflect for a moment on that estimate. There's nothing exact in project management. I've yet to be on a project that works exactly to the way we planned it. And you can also spend too much time planning, right? There's this idea of paralysis of analysis where you're trying to, get more information to construct just that perfect plan. You never get to execution. So in project management, we based everything off of estimates. Now, there's also what we call successive elaboration, where in the beginning, my estimates, could be grossly off, but they're good enough to get started. As the project progresses, we gain more information, we know how things are going, and we could make adjustments along the way. Now, so long as you weren't terribly off, it's usually you're able to reel it back in and recover and have a successful project. So again, there's going to be tools to help with that as well. Now, beyond the triple constraint, one aspect of project management that often gets overlooked is quality management, and this is how we define and manage the quality of the product deliverables. Interestingly enough, a lot of the projects we work on are in regulated industries. So the quality, for that matter, a lot of times is already determined by policies and procedures and things of that nature. Even if the industry wasn't regulated and the company is rather high on their capability maturity index, and they have policies and procedures in place, you could generally leverage those. But if they're not existent, then you would still use similar principles to assure the quality of the deliverables are truly meeting the specifications and the requirements. Next is human resource management. This is where we identify and manage the human resource needs. Work doesn't get done unless people are there to do it. And your human resource management has several different aspects, right? Identifying the appropriate skill set and aligning that with the needs of the project, developing the skill set. I have this saying where when I go on a project, I look to leave it better than I found it. And that includes the people that I'm working with as well, right? So you're always looking for opportunities to develop folks through these projects as well. It just helps build the morale of the team and really helps give back to the people that are participating and helping you achieve your goal. So there's tools and techniques for that, and then there's the other aspects of just managing people. Sometimes folks come into this project management role never managing people before. So there's tools and techniques as far as leadership skills. Behavioral styles is one that I like to focus on because sometimes just understanding where somebody comes from in their tendencies makes helping work together as a team a lot easier. So those are some of the aspects that we'll want to cover in human resource management. Communications management. I hinted at before, even project updates, right? It could be email, could be face-to-face meeting, things of that nature. You want to have a plan. It can't be ad hoc, because once the project work starts and you've deployed a bunch of folks to do different activities, keeping the information flow consistent is going to be key. The number of communication channels that are available as a team grows actually grows exponentially with the number of people that you add to the team. So you want to be able to manage the information flow so that everybody's singing off of the same sheet of music. After that, we have risk management, another area that often gets overlooked. A lot of times folks, they think they have a great plan and they go ahead and they just try to execute. And when that first thing happens, all chaos breaks loose. And it doesn't need to be that way. As I mentioned before, there's no such thing as a project plan. A successful project manager isn't necessarily one that comes up with the perfect plan and executes to it. It's to me, I found that the most successful project managers are the ones that can manage through, not if, but when these issues pop up. An even better project manager has the foresight, and this is where the lessons learned come in when you close up, right? You've been burned before, and you could anticipate certain things going wrong in the project, okay? Risk management allows a structured approach to identify some of those potential risks, to evaluate them, and just because a risk could occur doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do anything about it either, but at least you can assess it and proactively determine what your contingency plan might be. So that's an area that you'll certainly want to consider as well. Procurement management, this is where you manage your expenditures, right? When you're going to acquire some resources, again, both capital and human resources, when the payout's going to be, you're managing the cash flow and the budget through the procurement management. And then the last one is stakeholder management, or at least at the bottom of the list. It's at the bottom of the list, but it's not, it's by no means, the least important. As a matter of fact, when the PMBOK was updated from edition 4 to edition 5, one of the major differences was stakeholder management was broken out as its own knowledge area. It used to be included within communications management, but they felt that it was so important and so overlooked, they broke it out so that we all as project managers know, hey, you know what? Stakeholder management, that's very important. I need to identify early on who my stakeholders are, and I need to evaluate their role in the project and how I need to communicate and how I need to manage them. Because, there's a lot in project managers' plate, as you probably see, gathering so far. It's not just about managing the work, it's managing the people, it's managing the expectations, so that everybody can succeed. Now I come back up to the top, the integration management. It basically ties together all the other 9, right? It's basically that umbrella that kind of comes over all of these and allows you to put together your total comprehensive project management plan. So spent quite a bit of time on this. As I mentioned before, there's going to be an overview. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on some of these, and in others we have future webinars and our website, and you can always reach out if you need any details on something that you're currently working on. Let's go ahead and dig into this a little bit deeper. So project management processes, as I mentioned before, there are 5 process groups, there are 10 knowledge areas, and 47 processes. What is a process? As I mentioned before, a project itself is temporary and unique, right? It has its own set of deliverables, its own timeline, its own dynamics, okay? Each one is going to be different. Unlike operations, which is very much process driven. However, even though projects are unique and temporary, there are things that we can count on happening within a project. Because of that, project management methodology can be viewed as a set of processes where, in the middle, I always like to start in the middle. In the middle, you have some process where it's just basically like a little engine running. And if you put certain inputs into this engine that's running, certain outputs are expected, okay? Each activity within the project management framework has a defined process that could be followed to ensure successful project executions. For example, creating a project charter. There's a process with that. You can have a template. There's not one template. There are many templates, and you can pick and choose and modify one to kind of suit your needs. But if we think about creating the project charter as a process, what are the inputs? Well, I need to know the goal of the project. I need to know the stakeholders of the project. I need to know the potential team that I might have available to me. Some of those high-level inputs. We get that from different sources within the organization, subject matter expertise, things of that nature. These are all the inputs. We run it through the process of creating in addition with the template to create this project charter. The process output is a completed project charter, which is a documented agreement amongst everybody of what this team is going to be set out to do, and that can be said for the 46 other processes that are in the body of knowledge. Again, due to time, we're not going to cover all 46 of them, but we will give you some of the important tools that will certainly be helpful in churning through some of those. So, project in a nutshell. As I mentioned before, I'm presenting it this way because there is a graphical table, if you could imagine, where I have the 5 processes along the top and the 10 knowledge areas along the side, and it creates a grid, and we could put these activities in there. It'd be very difficult to see on a PowerPoint slide, but this is the summary, right? Basically, first thing we want to do is we want to initiate, and just to get a project rolling, there's only 2 activities. We want to develop a project charter, and we want to identify the stakeholders. The second step is then to plan. There are 24 different activities that we can do in the planning phase, and we're basically planning for each of the knowledge areas. And I just want to note that there's a little more than half of all the activities are in planning, right? Just goes to show you how important a good plan is up front. Again, you don't want to overplan, but having that solid plan is extremely important. So there's lots of activities that we identify, tools and techniques to help set the project team up for success. Then there's the execution. We're basically just working the plan. So the plan that we just created in the previous state, there's 8 activities, and you just work into the plan. We like to say failing to plan is planning to fail, right? So you have the plan. Once you have the plan, you can work the plan. Doesn't guarantee success, but it certainly puts you on that path. Excuse me. During the execution, as I mentioned before, concurrently we'll be monitoring and controlling. There's 11 activities. We're going to track and progress and make adjustments as needed. For those of you trained in lean methodology, think PDCA, plan, do, check, act, right? Where we have a plan, we're doing some work, we check our results, and we act. We make any adjustments and corrections, we go back to plan, and we do that again. That is very much, you'll hear in some circles, waterfall project management versus agile. This allows even a waterfall where activities are cascaded. The PDCA allows us to be more agile, make adjustments as needed. And then the last area is to close. And there's only 2 activities. We want to tie up the loose ends and capture the learnings. So stakeholder management. We bring that early on because of the 2 processes that we need to initiate a project, right? The first one is to identify the stakeholders, but all throughout you want to be able to manage stakeholder expectations and as well as their involvement in the project. As I mentioned before, it's a separate knowledge area that was introduced in the 5th. When we come around to the 6th, we'll report back on where that stands. But they've identified process to identify the people and groups that could influence or be impacted by the project, to identify and manage their expectations, and to develop strategies to effectively communicate with the stakeholders, managing expectations and involvement all throughout the project. One of the tools that we like to use is called a SIPOC, and this comes more from the Six Sigma body of knowledge, and is not necessarily always viewed upon as a project management tool, but we've found that it could be very effective in helping us identify stakeholders, especially if it's an improvement project, right? Because at the heart of it, we start right in the middle. There's a process, and the process itself is what we're trying to improve. And if we map that out, then we start cascading outward. There's inputs to the process and there's outputs to the process, right? And that's just process management in general. But those inputs come from somebody. Those inputs come from suppliers. Those suppliers could potentially be stakeholders for your project. Okay. Similarly, the process creates outputs. Those outputs have customers. Those customers could be stakeholders for your project, right? So, this is why we find that the SIPOC is a very effective tool for project management. One, because it allows us to kind of scope out the project, the improvement project that we're looking at, by the process that we're looking to improve. Helps us identify the inputs and outputs that could influence the quality of the output of the process. But as I mentioned before, stakeholders, right? At either end of the SIPOC, there are potential stakeholders that we want to consider for our improvement project. This is an example of a SIPOC that, when we, again, if we go back to the basic process management model of inputs, process, and outputs, the SIPOC is nothing more than just an extension of that, an expansion of that, where we're looking at who supplies the inputs, who receives the outputs. And the method, or at least the sequence of operations that you want to start with are suggested here. You start with the process. You know the process that you're trying to improve. The next thing you should know is the output that you're expecting from that process. So the second thing you do is identify the process. Now, what this could look like is a process map with the outputs next to each process step. And then you identify the customers, right? If you know there's an output, you know somebody wants that. And the customer could just be the next step of the process, or it could be an external customer, an internal customer, a different department, what have you. But we start there. We start from the middle and go out to the right. Then we go to the left. Okay, now, in order for my process to create this output, what inputs do I need? And you list those. Now you have the inputs, you ask the question, who provides those inputs? And this is where you get the list of suppliers that can also be potential stakeholders. And this is an example of what one might look like. Very basic example, something that everybody can relate to, but the process of making coffee. All right, you make a cup of coffee, you list out the process steps, we identify the outputs of each process step. The customers, as we mentioned before, sometimes it's just the next operation. And then ultimately the end customer, the consumer that's going to be enjoying the cup of coffee. And then we go to the left side. What are the inputs required for each process step? This is going to be key, not necessarily just for the stakeholder management, but also as you're trying to drive an improvement project. You want to be able to understand the input-output relationship and how you can drive your improvements. And then your suppliers, who provides each one of those inputs. So again, it's a very graphical technique that is meant to be used together with the team so that everybody could visualize what it is that we're trying to do and who's all that could be involved. Navigating to the terrain is something that all project managers need to take into consideration. I mean, the very nature of my work in consulting, I'm always going into new organizations, new people. There's new dynamics every single time. And understanding some of the challenges that you're walking into is going to be key. Challenges could arise when there's differences in functions, organizational structure, time zones, right? Vocabulary, different words that people use, and locations, geographical locations, or even just locations within a building. This can be resolved by employing more of a matrix organization with a layer of project management. And here's an example. Okay. This represents a hypothetical company where they have the functional operations along the top. You have your sales and marketing department, R&D, quality, operations, finance, human resources. Every organization has different levels as well. The business level is where your top management is going to be, your executives and your directors. The operations level, where the work kind of gets done, is the managers and the staff. And then the process level, where the real value transformation happens that we're delivering to the customer. That's where your supervisors and your operators, your direct labor, are going to be. And you can imagine that you have individuals represented by smiley faces here. It's a happy organization. You can have different levels of people in these different functions, and they have different languages. They have different, if these were stakeholders in a project, they have different viewpoints of what's important in the project. And how do you begin? So in this example, we're talking about product realization, designing and launching a new product. We need everybody to work together, all right? But it's the project manager's task to figure out how to do that elegantly. Well, before you do that, you need to, again, if you take that process approach and use the SIPOC and you identify the process, it helps you scope out the project. It helps you scope out where the process begins, where the process ends. So, the product realization, even though you're delivering a new product, the design control process is repeatable. And it begins somewhere and it ends somewhere. So here we might map out that the process input, it starts on the sales and marketing side, right? If you think about it, if you want to create a new product, it's got to be from the top down. It's got to begin with the customer, right? Thinking about what does the customer need and who's closest to them than sales and marketing. So the sales and marketing folks, they have an idea, they get the finger on the pulse, they know what the customer needs. Then they gather requirements and they work together with R&D. R&D then thinks about or comes up with ways of how they can deliver on that need. Your quality organization is going to be involved. Your operations, all too often operations gets involved a little bit too late in the process, but you want operations involved because you want to be able to design for manufacturability. You want to be able to design not just to meet the customer needs at any expense. It needs to be a profitable venture for the business as well. So you want to have operations involved, finance will be involved, human resources will be involved, and in the end of that, you're going to have your project, your process output. Again, hypothetical example, but this is how you're going to want to be thinking as a project manager working within an organization. The power interest grid is one of the tools that we use for managing the stakeholders. We showed that example before. You have different stakeholders in different departments of an organization and at different levels. And you need to understand how each one of these plays as a stakeholder. And here we can assess qualitatively their interest in the project as well as their power. Those that have high interest but low power, the low ability to influence the project, we want to keep those folks informed, right? They're interested in the project. We owe it to them to keep them informed how the project is going. For those that have high interest and high power, well, we want to manage those folks closely. Your project stakeholder will be there, your sponsor. Those are the folks that can gain or lose the most, and can also help influence the change that you're trying to implement. They're also the ones that can help you break down barriers. So you want to manage them closely. Now, there are going to be some folks that maybe don't have a lot of interest, but they have a lot of power. You just want to keep them satisfied, right? They really don't care too much about the output of the project, but maybe they have some other interest in mind. Just keep them satisfied because they have high power, right? They could be your greatest friend, or they could be, your greatest pain. So you want to keep those folks satisfied. And then the folks that have, low interest and low power, we're just going to monitor them, right? Basically, you're not going to make any extra effort on the communication up front, but you're going to monitor them. You're going to see if that changes at all, if you can see if there's any noise or such that you need to address. Project charter mentioned earlier before. So now that you've identified the stakeholders, we want to create a charter that initiates the project. They're critical for the successful establishment of an improvement team. We need that because that's that sheet of music that everybody's going to be singing off of. It sets the direction of the team of where we're going to go, almost like a compass, right? It doesn't tell me exactly how to get there, but it points me in a general direction. It's going to summarize the business case, the problem statement, the project scope, the goal statement, right? It gets to see where we're trying to go. Milestones and deliverables. We need ways to kind of check ourselves as well to make sure that we're on good track. And then the resources required. Again, this is going to be high level because we really don't know everything we need until we get into the planning and sometimes until we get into the execution. When we set up the project charter, we want to set up what we call SMART goals, right? So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I don't think you can go into any type of management or Six Sigma training without hearing about SMART goals. It's basically defining clearly what it is that we're trying to achieve. It needs to be measurable. We need to be able to measure so that we know if we're winning or losing, right? If we're achieving our goal. It needs to be achievable, right? Do not set a team on an impossible mission. It needs to be something that's well within the team's grasp. It's okay to be a stretch goal, right? And flexing it. I mean, sometimes the team grows the most through that, but you got to give your team a fighting chance to achieve the goal. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be aligned with the business. So your business case really helps with that. It has to be purposeful. Otherwise, folks will lose interest and the project won't be successful. It needs to be time bound. People need to know when to deliver by. Things just can't linger on. They'll never get done. So what are some project measures? Any project, right? As I mentioned before, these tools are good for any project. But since we're kind of putting this in the framework of preparing for Six Sigma, here's some example process improvement measures that we could be looking for. We could be looking to improve process capability, my CP, CPK, PP, PPK. I could be looking to reduce complaints. I could be looking to reduce internal defects, cost reductions, establishing better workflows, service improvements, my delivery to my customers, cycle time reductions, which often is linked to inventory reductions, and market share growth, right? How can I grow the business within my current market? And then we have different metrics that you'll need to establish. Again, think of this as a scoreboard. The team needs to know if we're winning or losing, if we're really making an impact and how well we're doing. As I mentioned before, if there's no time to it, things won't get done. If it's not measured, it doesn't get done, right? Or maybe you hear more often, what gets measured gets done. So establishing a good measure to help keep the team driving towards that goal is going to be extremely important. And it delivers the bottom line benefit to the business. So project feasibility and selection. Just because something is initiated doesn't necessarily mean all the resources are going to be allocated to it. You can have a draft of a project charter, but if it doesn't get agreed on to be resourced, then it doesn't get executed. So and during that time, you could draft several project charters to initiate and have reviewed. Project manager at that point will need to know how to assess the project feasibility and selection process. Effort versus impact is a good qualitative way of doing that. And quantitative ways, we use what's called CostBenefit Analysis, or CBA. And then there's a couple here that are common. Some are more common than others: return on assessments, return on investment, net present value, internal rate of return, and payback period. We'll touch on each one of those. Effort versus impact is a qualitative tool. We can use that to assess the impact of a project, right? How much benefit could I stand to gain versus how much work is this going to be? How many resources am I going to expense on this? Your low-hanging fruit is going to be those that have the high impact and low effort, right? Those are going to be the first ones that you're going to want to go for. You may also be interested in the high impact, high effort. Those are bigger projects. You'll want to manage those a little bit closely and use more project management tools on those to make sure that you capture the benefit. But then you have the ones that are low impact. So if it's low impact and low effort, you can consider if you want to do that in your spare time, what have you. But the ones you definitely want to stay away from, low impact, high effort. You don't want something that you're going to spend a lot of time on and only to gain a little bit of effort. So qualitatively, this directionally help you select through multiple projects that you have on hand. But the cost-benefit analysis is more of a quantitative view, and you can use numbers to assess how valuable a project could be and to relate one project to another. I'm just going to rifle through these pretty quickly. Return on assets is what benefit do I stand to gain based on the assets that I'm going to be investing upon. This could be, say I purchase a piece of equipment, that asset versus how much money can I make off of it. What's my return on asset? I could have return on investment. There's a total investment, the total project cost versus the income that I stand to gain. Net present value, the equations start getting a little bit more complicated. Thank goodness for software tools. The net present value is basically predicting the value of the earnings at a future point in time. This is kind of a common one that's used in larger organizations. To be honest with you, there's two that I use most often. Return on investment was the first one. Later on, we're going to see payback. But once in a while, that you do have some accounting groups that want to see the net present value of a project. Lesser used, but still used as the internal rate of return. That's the rate, the interest rate, or the rate of return if your net present value are equal to zero. You can't calculate that straight, right? So again, thank goodness for software tools that can evaluate that for us. But then the payback period is one it's an easy, quick calculation. It's your overall cost of the project divided by the annual cash inflows. And here, a lot of times my rule of thumb is you want a payback period of 1 year or less. If it's a bigger, more impactful project, I might even stretch it out as far as 2 years. But basically what I'm saying is if I pay for this project, I want my money back in at least 1 year, maybe 2 years if it's a big investment. But then anything after that is gravy, right? I keep gaining and I keep earning on that initial investment. So that's the feasibility. We select a project, then what do we do? Just flashing the 10 knowledge areas to remind us that as we're entering the planning phase, we need to consider all 10 aspects of our project. In our planning, so here's some of the tools that we're going to run through real quick. We're going to introduce the work breakdown structure, program evaluation review technique, or PERT, critical path method, and Gantt charts. Work breakdown structure, I think, is very important, whether it's on its own or as part of a Gantt chart. I usually go through a work breakdown structure exercise as I'm developing a Gantt chart. And you could think of it as a tree diagram. I mean, it looks very much like a tree diagram where you start at the bottom and you just start kind of cascading out. You start at the top level. What is it that you're trying to do? You break it down at a very high level into larger blocks or categories. And then each one of those you break down. You keep drilling down until you get to what we would consider a work package, something that could be executed upon, or at least a group of activities that could be executed upon. From there, and the work breakdown structure, as I mentioned before, it plays into the Gantt chart, but it'll also play into your PERT and your CPM. Program Evaluation Review Technique, or PERT, it's a network diagramming technique that can be used in conjunction with critical path method. So we start off with the work breakdown structure, and then what we do is we sequence the activities and we link them together using arrows to show the interdependencies. There is a natural flow of these things sometimes where the output of one process or one activity becomes the input of a next, and you need that first. Critical path method then is nothing more than identifying the activities within the process that defines the overall duration. Critical path is important to know because, excuse me, if any of those items are late or get delayed, that will extend the duration of the project. Similarly, if anything on the critical path can be pulled in time and done earlier, you have the potential to pull in the end date. Project manager will always want to know where the critical path is and manage to it, because there are tools and techniques that we have that could help influence the adherence to schedule on the critical path. Gantt chart is more of a graphical technique beyond the PERT, and is probably more commonly used because it overlays that network diagram on a calendar, so that folks can easily see the timeline and graphically see, how long a duration is relative to other durations. And there are features in project management software that allows us to identify the critical path. As seen here, the red items are critical path. If any of those go late, the entire project could go late. However, those blue items, if they go late, may not have an impact, if it's within a certain amount of allowance. Once you have the project schedule, now we need to assign those tasks to teams and individuals. And the RACI model is a handy tool or a methodology that can be used to identify the roles of responsibilities of each team member for different activities. R stands for responsible. These are going to be the people that are actually performing the tasks and that we assign the deliverables to. The person that's accountable is the ultimate person responsible should something go wrong. We like to say that those are the folks with the most skin in the game, and they're the ones that we'll want to keep very close in tune with, because they can also be the ones that help us work through some of the challenges. There are going to be some people that are just consulted, where not the person doing the work, but maybe they're a subject matter expert. They know some aspect. So we want to make that person available to the task owner, so that the task could be completed as intended. And then inform. There are some people that just need to be kept up to date with how things are going. Some other helpful tools, as we're running over time, not over time, but we're getting pretty close. These are some other aspects that you're going to want to consider. So working on any project, especially improvement projects, a lot of times you're working with creating and sorting through and assessing ideas, improvement ideas, problem-solving ideas, things of that nature. So some of the, two of the most commonly used ones will be affinity diagram, where you can freely collect ideas and group them together into categories. And a prioritization matrix. This is where we take everybody's ideas and we basically come up with a prioritization scheme, right? What's important? What are some important characteristics that we want to consider when we're assessing these ideas, and then come up with a way of systematically prioritizing them so that the highest priority ideas kind of rise to the top and we can act on those. I mentioned risk management, right? And I don't take that lightly. You want to be able to have good risk management tools. So Process Decision Program Chart, or PDPC, is a great tool that can be used for qualitative analysis. It starts off as a tree diagram, and then ultimately, you start playing the game of what if this happened, what can go wrong, and qualitatively identifying some potential risks and coming up with some risk mitigation strategies. Failure modes and effect analysis, or FMEA, is a more quantitative viewpoint where, again, what are all the things that could happen? What can go wrong? What's the severity if that thing happens? What's the probability of that thing happening to assess my overall risk? And then coming up with an appropriate response plan. Managing teams is going to be important for the success of your project. I mentioned before behavioral style analysis. I can't emphasize enough how valuable that is, as well as situational leadership. When you're working on formally developing team members, identifying strengths and opportunities for development, situational leadership provides a great model to work with your team through a project. Cause and effect relationships. Again, if we're talking about improvement projects, cause and effect relationships is going to be extremely, extremely important for us. We have matrix diagrams where we can graphically show the qualitative relationship between two items. Interrelationship diagraphs where we have a whole bunch of ideas, and some are causes, some are effects. We could have an effect over here that can actually be a cause of another effect. So it's a little bit more complex diagramming technique. And regression analysis, which is going to be more of a quantitative analysis where we're showing a mathematical relationship between two or more things, two or more variables. So wrapping up, leaving a few minutes for questions. Good, fast, and cheap pick 2. We kind of introduced the very basic fundamental of project management, and that's managing scope, time, and cost, and how there's this permanent linkage among those, and project manager's role in trying to bring balance to that. We introduced a project management framework for you to consider to apply towards your improvement projects. And we went through a project in a nutshell and how that framework applies to planning out and preparing a project and managing through a project. And then we shared some of the select tools and techniques that are available. We went into detail on some, and like I said, there are some others that we can explore through future webinars. And there's even more tools that you can find there as well. I should also mention that we also have we have our website, and we have group pages on LinkedIn and Facebook as well, where you can get more information on these topics as well as others, as well as just kind of keeping tabs on some of our training programs that we have coming out. We'll have a beta version of a Six Sigma training program coming out soon that will be made available. So keep tabs on that. Keep tabs on our upcoming webinars as well. But at this point, I think what I want to do is maybe open up for any questions that folks may have, and you can either, at this point, I'll unmute the lines, and so if you want to just verbally ask a question, or if you want to type it in the chat, either way, I'll stay on the line for another minute or two and answer any questions. All right, well, with that, I'll just assume that there may be no questions right now, but certainly if any questions do come up between now and the next time we get together, feel free, send us an email. What we'll be doing is sending out a link of this recorded session where you can download it if you want to review it again, and we'll also send a link to some of the other resources that we have. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today on our Six Sigma study series on project management, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Take care. Goodbye.